Good day, dear colleagues and guests. My name is Olha Vovk, and I'm staff of academician Petrochunko Center for Ukrainian Studies and Local History, as well as School of History of Vasil Karazin, Kharkiv National University, Ukraine. At the same time, I'm a co-coordinator of the scientific project City and War 2.0 that was established by team of Karazin University and Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, University of Alberta. Today I will be a moderator of our event and I need to inform you that the event will be recorded and published on the web resources of our project. I draw your attention that maybe later in the Zoom chat you can see the rules of our event. You please read them. Now with great pleasure I pass the word to headliner of our event, Dr. Claudia Zini. She is founder and director of Kuma International Center for Visual Arts from Post-Conflict Society in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And she is going to present for us her research, Sarajevo under siege, cultural resistance and the city as a living monument, voices of defiance. Dear Claudia, thank you for connection us, for taking the time to meet in this event today, and I hand you the microphone. You are welcome.
Thank you so much, Olga, for the introduction, and thank you again and the whole team behind the project. I'm very honored that I can be with you today to talk about Sarajevo and a topic that is very dear to me. As you said, I am the founder and director of Kuma International in Sarajevo. I'm also an art historian and a curator. I come from Italy, but I've lived in Sarajevo for the past 10 years. In this time, I have worked closely with many of the artists and curators and cultural workers who shaped the city's cultural life during and after the war, during and after the siege. My aim today is not to provide a complete history of the siege and the art and culture that was happening back then, but to highlight some of the people, institutions, and practices that kept Sarajevo's cultural life alive under extreme conditions, turning the city itself into a living monument, sustained through the creative persistence of its people. Much of what I will present today has been preserved thanks to the effort of local institutions and foundations that safeguarded their archives, as well as the many scholars, journalists, filmmakers, and writers who have documented and analyzed cultural life under siege in Sarajevo. I myself have written about it in my doctoral research, and at Kuma International, we often have the privilege to present, preserve, and discuss these ongoing findings. This work of preservation today remains crucial, given how much was lost during the war, not only in terms of human lives and the thousands who left the city, but also in the destruction of the cultural heritage, so libraries, museums, monuments, archives, and much more. I would say that currently the situation is further complicated by Bosnia's constitutional framework, which was drafted 30 years ago as part of the Dayton Peace Agreement, which left culture and heritage without clear institutional protection. With little to no structural support from the state budget, memory survives largely thanks to the commitment of individuals and organizations determined to keep Sarajevo's cultural history alive, often in the face of competing or conflicted narratives. In this talk today, I'm going to focus on Sarajevo. And while the context is specific, I do hope that its lessons about destruction, creativity, memory, and survival may resonate with the broader discussion of cultural landscape under war in Ukraine. The siege of Sarajevo lasted 1,425 days, from the 5th of April 1992 until the 29th of February 1996. Nearly 14,000 people were killed. Hardly anyone in Sarajevo could have foreseen the chain of events that led to the collapse of Yugoslavia and the devastation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. On April 6, 1992, just as the war was beginning, Bosnia was formally recognized as an independent state by the European community, the very day after the siege of Sarajevo began. And a few weeks later, on the 22nd of May, 1992, Bosnia was admitted to the United Nations as its 177th member state. Only weeks before the outbreak of hostilities, most Sarajevans still believed in the possibility of a peaceful transition to democracy, economic progress, and the continuation of their shared life together. For the city's residents, the beginning of the siege was a shock beyond words. When the siege began, some 350,000 people were trapped in the city. Writer Alexander Hammond called this the city's greatest tragedy. The same place that had proudly welcomed the world during the 1984 Winter Olympic Games was now brutally severed from it. A city once emblematic of openness and connection became a space of radical isolation, incomprehensible to those outside, unimaginable to those within. From the earliest day of the war, positions were established on the hills surrounding Sarajevo, first by the Yugoslav People Army, the GNA, alongside with the Bosnian Serb forces, and later after the GNA's formal withdrawal by the Army of Republika Srpska. It was these forces that deployed artillery and snipers overlooking the city. In the first day of May 1992, the post office building was burned to the ground. Communication lines with the outside world were cut. The last train left Sarajevo at noon on May 2nd, just hours before the station itself was hit by a missile. In those first days, people lived in shock, hiding in cellars, barely understanding what was happening. By mid-May, the city began to die in a new way. Most districts no longer had water or electricity. By the autumn of 1995, life resembled a medieval siege. Water became one of the biggest problems. People washed clothes in the Miljachka River and collected rainwater in buckets. To keep warm, those without firewood burned old books, shoes, furniture, even parquet floors. They lost weight, not only because of poor nutrition, but also from everyday stress, from carrying heavy water canisters, from running to avoid sniper fire, from digging trenches and bunkers. The first winter, was long, bitter, and almost unbearable. No water, no electricity, no heating, and broken windows letting in the snow and ice. Many people found it almost unbelievable that such horrors could take place in plain view of the world, and nevertheless they refused to give in, seeking ways to orient themselves in chaos. Some attempted what anthropologist Ivana Maček calls an imitation of normal life, re-establishing routines even as they feared that coping with inhumane conditions might itself be dehumanizing. Yet Maček also tells us that when destruction is ever present and death a constant companion, people often respond with startling creativity. In Sarajevo, this meant reshaping knowledge and form of expressions, while also confronting profound existential questions. Death was never abstract. It could strike at any moment to anyone, just a few steps away. The war catapulted artists into a world of need, ruins, and ravaged lives. Studios were destroyed and materials unavailable, so artists turned to the debris around them. Art historian Azra Begic described how Sarajevo's ruins became materia prima for the alchemic metamorphosis achieved solely by artists and saints, turning water into wine, stone into bread, rubbish into art. What might otherwise have stood only as evidence of defeat and ruin was reimagined as a metaphor of spirit triumphing over destruction. So if the siege of Sarajevo is remembered as a time of brutal shelling, daily struggle for survival, and systematic destruction, cultural life did not stop. As documented in the book Sarajevski Memento, 1992-1995, compiled by Professor Amira Kapetanovic, the city witnessed a remarkable flowering of theater, music, literature, visual arts, even under siege. 182 theater productions, 170 exhibitions, and 48 concerts took place. The National Gallery alone hosted more than 40 exhibitions, and entirely new initiatives, most famously the Sarajevo Film Festival, emerged from the ruins. The collapse of older cultural institutions created space for smaller, independent initiatives and organizations. As Larissa Kurtovic tells us, this cultural production became an unorthodox form of civic engagement, which in its emphasis on music and the arts and its refusal of national frames stood out as a unique, complicated, and largely indirect site of political contention. One of the last peacetime exhibitions at the National Gallery had been Bosnia seemingly in 1992, curated by Nermina Ziljo. The exhibition addressed the political chaos leading up to the referendum on independence. Nermina generously opened her archives to me when I moved to Sarajevo, though her own story reflects the devastation of the war. Her house was destroyed during the siege, her books and documents lost, and in 1995 she left for the United States to recover. She returned to Sarajevo in 2007, and like many Sarajevans, still struggles today to recall the pre-war period without pain. She remembered that just weeks after the exhibition closed in March 1992, the gallery was sheltering refugees fleeing from the hills, while its own staff succumbed to the divisions that had brought about the war. Some guarded it, some shot at it, and some ran away. One guard died, and one fireman lost both his hands and legs while putting out a fire on the roof. In March 1993, again at the National Gallery, Nermina Ziljo curated an exhibition of war posters, which was conceived as a way to reflect on how art and visual culture respond to war. The exhibition later traveled to Paris, and the audience in Paris praised the exhibition as a symbol of resilience, yet Nermina emphasized the fragility of this resilience. In Sarajevo, cultural production persisted, but it did so within conditions of isolation and ongoing destruction. I put here some of the posters that were exhibited at the exhibition. Sarajevo 92, the second one, the English translation of the title of the poster is "And you, what have you done for victory?" And the third one, Gens una sumus, it's about the previous coexistence in Sarajevo for centuries before the war of different religions. Cultural heritage itself during the siege was also directly targeted. In August 1992, shells fired from the hills set the National University Library on fire, destroying nearly 2 million books and manuscripts. And in its ruins, Vedran Smailovic, that you see in the picture, later known as the cellist of Sarajevo, became an enduring symbol of dignity, performing on his cello while shells still fell. In June 1994, the Sarajevo Philharmonic Orchestra performed Mozart's Requiem, a concert that carried both mourning and defiance. Other institutions throughout the war remain active. Sartre, the Sarajevo War Theatre, and Kamerni Teatar 55 stage plays under candlelight all the time. While in 1993, Haris Pashovic launched the International Theatre and Winter Festival, while his Sarajevo Winter Festival that he had founded in 1984 continued throughout the war. Independent radio also played a crucial role during the siege. Radio Zid, that translates in English in The Wall, was founded in late 1992 by Professor Zdravko Grebo, and the radio defined its mission as the preservation of Sarajevo's civic spirit and urban culture. It arose partly to fill the media vacuum caused by shortages of electricity and resources, which drastically reduced the ability for print and television to reach the public. During those years, even fashion became a form of resistance. In 1993, Sarajevo staged the Miss Besieged Sarajevo contest, which was held in a basement shelter to avoid sniper fire. Young women from Sarajevo parade in a swimsuit while holding a banner that read, "Don't let them kill us." And 17 years old Inela Nogic was crowned the winner. Back to art and artists. Established artists during the siege, such as Alma Suljevic, were very active. They never ceased working those years. In 1994, she staged a powerful gesture by moving a sculpture called Kentauromachia that was built from the burned carcass of a Sarajevo tram throughout the city street. The work evoked a mythical battle between civilization and barbarism, while also mirroring the artist's own dilemma over whether to remain in the besieged city. Its journey was abruptly halted by sniper fire, leaving it unfinished. In many ways, this interruption came to symbolize Sarajevo's wartime art scene itself, both fragile and defiant, created from destruction and kept alive under constant attack. At the same time, younger art students such as Nebojša Šerić-Šoba did not wait for peace to make work. He lived it. He was a third-year student at the Academy of Fine Arts when the siege began. Šoba split his time between the front line and the academy, risking his life to defend Sarajevo while trying to sustain a practice under impossible conditions. He described that precarious balance as a way to keep a certain equilibrium. Limited materials force intense experimentation, and his wartime gesture often tested the boundary between art and survival. Although he would become more publicly visible in the post-war scene, his experience as an artist on the front line was formative for both his work and for the city's emerging post-war art community. While international figures such as Susan Sontag, Christian Boltanski, Bernard Henry Levy, Annie Leibovitz, John Baez, and many more help amplify Sarajevo's cultural resistance to the wider world, I believe that the heart of this story belongs to the local artists, curators, and citizens who created under siege. Their work is too often overshadowed by the fame of visiting intellectuals. Still, the presence of these outsiders mattered. It showed that Sarajevo's struggle resonated globally, and it testified that the siege was not invisible. Artists and intellectuals came, witnessed, and stood with Sarajevans. Give me a second. Thank you. So perhaps the most dynamic node of activity during the siege was the Obala Art Center, founded in 1984 by Izeta Građević and Mirsad Purivatra as an alternative art space. Obala became one of the most important hubs of cultural resistance in Sarajevo those years. Relocated to the basement of the Academy of Performing Arts after its space was destroyed by shelling and fire, Obala challenged the city's cultural energy into projects of urgency, defiance, and creativity. And in 1995, it even launched the first Sarajevo Film Festival, today the city's most important cultural event. Its staff chose to live and work together in the basement underground as an alternative to the existing chaos. We felt, they say, that if we continued to work, we would win, because we would succeed in keeping our identity and gaining back our freedom. Events were organized out of nothing, using whatever was at hand, often resembling a kind of arte povera. The first major initiative that Obala launched was Witnesses of Existence between December 92 and the spring of 1993. And the exhibition is now recognized as one of the most radical exhibitions in Bosnia and Herzegovina's art history. It was conceived by Mirsad Miro Purivatra, and it presented one-day solo shows every 2 weeks in the bombed Sutjeska cinema, a building that was shelled in March 1992, that later became both a cultural site and a sheltered passage through a sniper fire. The exhibitions were brief, sometimes lasting only hours, and attending them meant risking sniper attacks. Many of the participating artists, often linked to the Academy of Fine Arts, work with the limited materials available under siege, bricks, broken glass, burnt wood, ashes, newspapers, and other debris. Their installation transformed ruins into cultural space, producing portraits of life under siege and testimonies of spiritual resistance. The destroyed cinema, ironically, offered relatively cover, and thousands of Sarajevans passed through its exhibitions, which stood as an act of survival as well as a political defiance. This is a map from the archive of Leila Hodzic, who used to work with Obala back then. And it's a map that was created it's in English, and it was created to explain foreigner visiting the city how to reach the Sutjeska cinema, which was here. The strength of Witnesses of Existence lay in its diversity. Each artist responded differently to the siege, but they all transformed fragments of destruction into acts of testimony. Their work became commentary on the dire situation, the absence of UN and NATO intervention, the spectacle of violence in global media, and the stark contrast between Sarajevo's pre-war cosmopolitan sophistication and its wartime deprivation. So Nusret Pasic, he was the Dean of the Academy of Fine Arts, and he gave the project its title and exhibited sculptures that were made of bricks and woods with elongated scream-like figures recalling Munch. He displayed fragments of destroyed cars and diary notes written on pages of Oslobođenje, the only newspaper available back then. On the gallery wall, he inscribed that on the day of his show, which was the 2nd of December 1992, 3 people had been killed and 74 were wounded. Zoran Bogdanovic presented 2 works, Destruction Spirituality, Rematerialization, and Memory of People. The latter consisted of hundreds of obituary photos cut from Sarajevo newspapers, arranged in a long composition with chair placed before them, inviting viewers to sit and listen while local radio broadcast family messages to the missing. This is Ante Juric, who had earlier staged Sarajevo shot in the Academy courtyard, firing a gun into the air as a warning that history was repeating itself, evoking Gavrilo Princip's 1914 assassination. He worked in the Sutjeska ruins with rubble and debris, and his installation explored what critic Maja Bobar called an aesthetic of destruction, the act of transforming war junk into art. Peter Waldeg, he was a graphic artist and professor at the Fine Art Academy in Sarajevo, and he created sculptures from heavy Austro-Hungarian bricks, arranged into stairways and grave-like forms, evoking both history and loss. Mustafa Skopliak exhibited the work Sarajevo 92, 91, 92, 93, 94, small sculpted heads symbolically buried under Sarajevo soil, surrounded by trees made of broken glass with candles burning inside. The work recalled graveyards and mass graves, but also suggested the need to protect memory. Edin Numankadic showed a work called Traces from the War, an installation that was built around a wartime kitchen set, table set with bread, water, candles, humanitarian aid tins, and an earlier painting that he made before the war. As Maja Bobar tells us again, in this claustrophobic reality of the siege, a kitchen table could become one's whole world. Sanjin Jukic offered a sharp critique of Western indifference, In his work, Sarajevo Ghetto Spectacle, he combined CNN and European news footages with the new vocabulary of siege life, words like shelling, genocide, sniper, sanctions, framed by the word Sarajevo that was written in the style of a Hollywood sign. And the last artist in the group, Radoslav Tadic, he closed the series of exhibition in March 1993 with a work that was called Prediction. And it was an installation that placed bright, real red apples on hospital cabinets beside abstract drawings. In a city where apples had virtually disappeared, their sudden presence carried a jolt of meaning. And when the exhibition ended, apparently the apples were handed out to the audience. Obala was working with many artists during the siege, and he also exhibited Sarajevo photographer Milomir Kovacevic, whose presence throughout the siege was legendary, as an American photographer, Leslie Fredkin, told me. Between 1992 and 1995, Milomir shot over 30,000 images of the besieged city, often giving prints to friends as keepsakes or for urgently needed documents. He became a very recognizable figure on the street, always wearing the same hand-knitted sweater and carrying his camera. One of the most powerful series that he made, it's called Tito, Sarajevo 1992-1995, and it showed portraits of Josip Broz Tito found amid the ruins of homes, schools, and offices. Shattered glass and broken frames mirrored the collapse of Yugoslavia itself. And in 1993, Obala also invited him to exhibit 15 black and white photographs of unknown graves. He captured them by venturing out under fog, risking shells and snipers. Many graves belong to children who died for lack of basic medical care, marked only by wooden plaque with NN, unknown name. These burials reduce people to numbers. In this war, a transformation of victims occurred, a mass of human beings with just numbers on a piece of wood. I could have easily ended up in that cemetery myself, Milomir said. In the exhibition, each photo was paired with a candle, and the show ended when the candles burned out, as there was no electricity. A requiem of sorts, Milomir said. Despite the risk of crossing sniper-exposed bridges to attend the exhibition, the audience came. In the West, Milomir said, people show up, have a drink and a chat. Here in Sarajevo, they risk their lives to see the work. That gives you the will to continue because it proves that it means something to others. If Milomir's photographs bore witness to Sarajevo from within, the design group Trio sought to address the outside world directly. Founded in 1985 by Bojan Hadžialilović, Dalila Duraković, and Leila Mulabegović, Trio used irony and mass media symbols to break through indifference. They worked at the Collegium Artisticum Gallery in the Scanderia complex, where thanks to the willingness of nearby station UN soldiers to provide them with a single electrical cable, they had just enough power to run one computer and a light bulb. Over time, several young volunteers joined them, helping with layouts and other tasks. And for all this work, Bojan and Dalila rarely received money. Instead, they were compensated in goods, such as food, cigarettes, or whatever was needed to continue working. Yet their most important wartime designs were precisely those that were not commissioned or paid for by anyone. In 1993, within the space of a few days, they created Greetings from Sarajevo, a series of postcards and posters that became their own unique artistic statement, a sharp visual language of irony and dark humor, aimed at attracting international attention and calling for intervention. We paid for paper in cigarettes, Bojan recalled, explaining how they worked in basements with minimal electricity. We made those 40 sketches in 2 to 3 days, and then we printed them. If you have goodwill, nothing can stop you. What can you do as a designer in war circumstances? You must be very creative for the simple reason that every day could be the last day of your life. Instead of war photography, Trio appropriated Western icons. The Coca-Cola logo was rebranded as Enjoy Sarajevo, and this Warhol's Campbell soup became Sarajevo soup, pierced with bullet holes. A parody of the First World War Uncle Sam poster declared, "I want you to save Sarajevo, nearest recruiting station." A poster marking the 10th anniversary of the 1994 Winter Olympic Games showed Olympic rings as barbed wire, as if Sarajevo itself was rendered as a concentration camp. Sorry. We knew that graphic design could not stop the war, Boyan told me, but we did it for our city. The citizens and Sarajevo were one being, one destiny, one story. We had nothing to lose. Sarajevo was more important than all of us. Their postcards and posters soon traveled abroad, often without their knowledge, appearing in magazines and exhibitions around the world. This circulation amplified Sarajevo's voice internationally, even as the city itself remained under siege. And with Trio, we reached the end of the artists that I wanted to highlight today. And I'd like now to move towards my conclusions about what this cultural life under siege meant for Sarajevo. During the siege, Sarajevo became an active site of survival and creativity. Each concert, exhibitions, and performance were both testimony and resistance against destruction and a refusal to let the besiegers break the city's spirit. This persistence, I believe, did not end with the siege. Artists, curators, and cultural workers carried it into the post-war years, rebuilding institutions, opening new ones, shaping Sarajevo's identity, and mentoring new generations. Their testimony, preserved in archives, artworks, and lived memory, remains central to the city's cultural fabric. Yet, I also believe that this legacy is fragile. Many works lasted only hours, much was destroyed during the siege, and post-war Bosnia left cultural institutions chronically under-supported. To study this period is to confront paradoxes: extraordinary creativity born from destruction, memory preserved against loss, and culture sustained without systematic support. In this sense, Sarajevo itself became a living monument, not one built in stone, but in survival and creativity. And that monument remains delicate, held as much in memory as in archives. And to close, I would like to remember two irreplaceable cultural voices that were silenced by the war. Aida Buturovic, a gifted 32 years old librarian and translator, was killed in August 1992 after helping to rescue books from the burning National and University Library. And 3 years later, again in August, but in 1995, writer and journalist Karim Zaimovic, who was back then only 24, was also killed by shrapnel. Sorry, I missed the breath. He was also killed by shrapnel, leaving behind the promise of an extraordinary literary career. Their absence, too, forms part of Sarajevo's cultural monument, a monument carried in memory and testimony, in lives cut short, yet still shaping the city's survival. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Dear Claudia, thank you for your impressive speech and your interesting report. Dear guests, probably someone have questions for Claudia. So now I have questions, for I will start the discussion. Dear Claudia, what do you mean? What role what role did these art practices that you describes now play in making Bosnian War and siege of Sarajevo visible for the world community? What do you mean?
If I understand your question, Olga, you want to know how this art that was produced during the siege made the siege, visible to the outside world?
Yes, sure.
Well, in different ways, I believe. First of all, there were many, during the siege, Sarajevo hosted many local but also international journalists and photographers. And they did go and attend exhibitions and concert and theater plays. So the news traveled outside Sarajevo so that the city would not be forgotten. I didn't want to mention all the foreign intellectuals who were in Sarajevo those years. I mean, I briefly mentioned some names, but I wanted to focus my talk to like local productions, like local artists and cultural workers. That, for example, the fact that Susan Sontag staged Waiting for Godot in Sarajevo, it had like an international resonance. So I think that it was actually, that was also important, you know, for Sarajevo, for people outside Sarajevo to know what was happening in the city. And then coming back to a local artist, for example, the work of Trio, they made postcards with that design, like physical postcards that I'm so lucky I have some of them here with me, like the original one, like this one, for example. And in the back, like it is a real postcard that says this document has been printed in war circumstances, no paper, no inks, no electricity, no water, just goodwill. And this was very easy. That's what I understood from Boyan. This was very easy for international people in Sarajevo to carry when they would travel outside Sarajevo. So these postcards became kind of a, you know, a messages to the external world. And so Boyan and his team, Trio, they would distribute these postcards to all the internationals in Sarajevo, and then they would bring them outside the city to kind of spread the message. It was a very cheap and convenient way of transporting things outside the siege, for example. I hope I responded to your question.
Yes, thank you. And oh, I see that Taras Nazaruk wrote in chat. Just a minute. So thank you for this illuminating story of the artistic life of the city under the siege. I was wondering how this memory and documentation about those practices is preserved over the decades. What are the main institutions and actors in Sarajevo now working on memory preservation about the war in general, but also about the cultural sphere specifically?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. This is a very important question, and I've been thinking about this. Not just me, but I know there are many colleagues from Bosnia and from abroad that are dealing with these topics. So what I was thinking is that everything that I showed you today, and of course there was so much more happening during the siege. I just, I mean, I had some limitations in terms of time, but everything what was happening was carried out by people who are still nowadays very active in the cultural scene of Sarajevo. So the Obala Gallery is not Obala Gallery anymore. It's Obala like association, and they've been running the Sarajevo Film Festival from 1995 until this year, and they will continue. I was mentioning the theater Sartre and Kamerni Teatr 55. They've been active since the siege, as of until today. I showed a map that Leila Hodzic showed me. I think she drew that. So what I want to say is that the protagonists of the cultural scene in Sarajevo back then, first of all, everybody was extremely young because it's been 30 years now. and they were almost everybody was in their early 20s. So I guess they also had like a lot of enthusiasm and energy. But they've been acting, they've been working until today. So the preservation, basically what happens is that these people, Leila Hodzic, Izeta Građević from Obala, Sartre, Kamerni, they have archives, but also they are like personal archives. I was mentioning Nermina Ziljo. Back then, she was the curator of the National Gallery. There is an archive at the National Gallery. Sometimes it was hard to preserve archives because they would be physically destroyed during the war. Like you can see in this photo that I'm sharing about Sarajevo, there is the big building, the beautiful building to the right of the river. It's the National Gallery, now City Hall. And I was mentioning that it was completely destroyed and 2 million books were lost. But let's say institutions that are still active today and people from the cultural scene back then that are still active today, they have their own archives, personal archives. Sometimes when I was doing research for my PhD, I realized how somehow it's been for me at least a treasure hunt to find these documents, to find these stories. So you usually, you meet someone over coffee. Sarajevo is a small place, especially when it comes to cultural art scene. And then somebody would point at me to Izeta from Obala Gallery, and then talking to her, I would understand that she has like personally like a huge archive at home. So you need to be privileged enough to get access to that. But also Nermina herself, as I was mentioning, she had a lot of books and things that she would try to preserve about exhibitions going on during the siege. But at some point, her house was bombed, so she lost everything. I think there is a big work and like a big effort for institutions and single individuals to preserve archives. And again, the situation when it comes to culture in Bosnia is a little bit complicated, mostly because of the lack of financial support. Milomir Kovacevic, the photographer I was mentioning, he took 30,000 pictures during the war. I have a feeling he preserved them all because it's been 30 years that after the war that Milomir, every couple of weeks, he has a new exhibition showing photos that he took during the siege, which is incredible. And that's his personal private archive. And I have a feeling for these personal archives, nobody really received. I'm not 100% sure, but I have a feeling nobody received like institutional support so far because all the institutions are already like struggling on their own. Again, hopefully I replied to this question.
Thank you. And Maya Zeko wrote, Dear Claudia, thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation and all your work. She need to leave now and wish all of them have a good afternoon. And Jacopo Sala has a question. Thank you very much, Miss Claudia, for the presentation and the interesting facts. I would like to know if the interpretation of the masterpiece you cited can change through time. Do their interpretation change from the generation who's looking at them? Thank you very much in advance.
Thank you, Jacopo. I'm not sure 100% I understood exactly the question, like the interpretation of the masterpiece. Like, is he referring to the entire production during the war or to a specific something that I mentioned? I'm sorry, Olga, I didn't understand from the question.
No worries. I was specifying on certain the ones that you showed us about even the city, the images that were talking about the siege, that were showing the siege. According to the people who are looking at them, what if the feeling or the interpretation of them change? For example, the new generation against the generation who lived the facts, for example.
Thank you, Jacopo. So I don't have a specific answer when it comes to when it comes to the younger generation, although I know, for example, there is a professor of art history at the Faculty of Humanities in Sarajevo. Her name is Asja Mandic. She's a professor of art history, and she wrote many articles about Sarajevo under siege and the cultural production. And I relied on those articles a lot. She's great, and she met me many times when I was doing my research. And she has great students at the Faculty of Fine Arts, of Art History, sorry. And I know she's transmitting this knowledge. And I know, because I know personally those students, that there is a lot of enthusiasm. What I can tell you, I will take this opportunity to say something. I didn't officially included in the talk because I wasn't sure, and also I wanted to, as a final slide, I wanted to remember Aida and Karim, who lost their life in Sarajevo. There was something very interesting that happened a couple of days ago as I was preparing this talk. A friend of mine from Sarajevo shared an article on Instagram, and it is something that was written for eFlux Notes. I don't remember the name of the author, but she's not Bosnian. It's a foreigner writing about the Sarajevo Film Festival, the legacy of the Sarajevo Film Festival in Sarajevo, which was born during the siege and in the summer of 1995. And like many of us, foreigners, I would say, especially when we first approach this topic, I think we all tend to a little bit romanticize everything that happened in Sarajevo during the siege when it comes to art and culture, people risking their lives, going to theater and producing art out of nothing. And that's how she started the article. She said something about the spirit of cinema that saved Sarajevo, kept Sarajevo alive. And there was a very interesting comment by Shoba, who is the artist I mentioned in my presentation, who was a very young student at the Fine Arts Academy during the war, but he was also a soldier because he was drafted. So he was an artist during the days that he had free from the front line and then going back. And now, you know, Shoba after the war became a very famous artist, maybe one of the most famous artists from Bosnia. So he's both an artist and a veteran. He's from Sarajevo. And the comment he gave, like briefly, to this spirit of cinema, keeping Sarajevo alive, he said, well, actually, it was not the spirit of cinema who kept Sarajevo alive, it was the Bosnian army. And I found it, I mean, I laughed when I read it, and then I read it again, and I was like, wow, this is a great point. And it comes not from someone who is not familiar with the art, and you know, somebody who for sure maybe back then still appreciated. He was making art during the war when he was posing from the front line. But 30 years after, looking back, it feels like he's very angry or disillusioned, or you know, I don't know what happened with him, but he said, hey, it was not cinema that kept us alive. It was actually the army. So I think he's thinking of the, you know, sacrifice that he did and his generation. So I think it's a very interesting question, because all of us writing about this, and I know there are other colleagues from Bosnia, for example, Irfan Hožić. There is a young scholar from Poland who was also a student at Kuma summer school many years ago, Eva Anna Kumelowski, who wrote an excellent book about cultural production during the siege, and it's very accurate. And there is a lot of enthusiasm somehow, you know, despite these crazy conditions, that there was still the will to create. There is also a beautiful documentary film that was made by a friend of mine, Remy Ordon, who is a journalist who is still working for Le Monde, and he was working for Le Monde during the siege. And he made a beautiful documentary when only people from Sarajevo are talking. And many of them, they were working in culture, and they are still working today in culture. And they all say how culture was important, how culture was great. There is somebody talking about theater, saying that for them, back then, doing theater, going to theater during the war, it was the same as having a glass of water and a piece of bread. which is maybe something that today, after 30 years, somebody would, could look back and say, well, I don't know if it was that relevant because still there was so much destruction, so many people died. Not to mention that this is also another comment that I heard from somebody from Sarajevo who was in the siege. Not to mention that while Sarajevo had chances for music, concert, art exhibitions, there were other places in Bosnia that did not have that until like a genocide was committed in Srebrenica. So I guess there is a space for conversation, and I'm sure there are many different opinions, and it would be absolutely interesting to talk to the youngest generation to see, what they think about what happened like 30 years ago.
Thank you, Claudia. And also Alice Devecci wrote in the chat, do you think the new generation of Bosnian artists keep the same spirit of resistance of the older ones, even in times of peace? Thank you, dear Claudia, for your presentation and work in general.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, I would say so. I think the moment I moved to Sarajevo, I was, the moment I came to Bosnia the first time, because I met a group of artists from another place in Bosnia. And I was really struck by the creativity, by their enthusiasm, considering that they really didn't have much. I mean, me coming from Italy and from the Italian art scene, I thought, in Bosnia, they don't really have much. They have no support, they have no infrastructure. They live in a traumatized country. I mean, I thought everything is very complicated for them. And maybe because of that, even for the younger generation, they seem to me, they have an incredible energy. And I can just give you a couple of examples. Like in 2016, Mac Hubier, who was back then, I think he was a 22, 23 years old art student at the academy. He opened a gallery in Sarajevo. And it was not a big commercial gallery like the galleries we would find, I don't know, somewhere in Europe or in America. But it was a great exhibition space, a great cultural space. And he said, I want to have this space for my friends at the academy that usually don't have many opportunities to exhibit in big institutions in Bosnia, so I'm going to offer them a space. And I remember I was so enthusiastic. I wrote about it. I was a great fan of the gallery project because I thought this guy is amazing, and who in Italy would be able to open an exhibition space being so young. And then unfortunately the gallery is not open anymore because Mac left Sarajevo, and it's always, I guess, very complicated to keep business here while you are abroad. But the gallery ran for years very successfully. And now in Sarajevo, there is another gallery, Manifesto Gallery, that was also open, I think, already maybe 3 years ago by two, it was a trio back then, now it's two, but I guess some very, very young artists from Bosnia with a lot of enthusiasm. And yes, they didn't have the money at the beginning, but they found the money and they put together this incredible project, and it's still running. Hopefully, I wish them like 1,000 more years of activity. So I do think maybe it sounds banal, but in a place that is still struggling on all fronts, somehow the struggle is something that gives energy to the young people. And I remember even Mac at the beginning in the Brodac Gallery, I think the first exhibition, they did not have electricity. And maybe in some other place in the world, people would have said, let's wait until we have electricity to open the gallery officially. And he said, well, during the war, there was no electricity and we had hundreds of exhibitions. So we're going to open the exhibition in Brodac with candle lights because it was, it had been done before. It's nothing new. So yes, to reply to your question, yes, I think that's, there is the same energy. That's what I see.
Thank you, Claudia. Such an interesting and impressive report and discussion today. And probably now I will propose for you the last question of today's event. Could you give for us, for our guests, more information about your institution, Kuma International? Because I know that it also makes great work in the sphere of study of art practices in post-conflict Sarajevo and Bosnia, and we really see many parallels of events and facts of Bosnian war and Russian-Ukrainian war, current war. So please inform us more detail about Kuma International.
Thank you so much, Olga. Yes, so I founded Kuma International as a non-profit organization here in Sarajevo back in 2018. Back then, it was my third year in Sarajevo, researching about contemporary art from Bosnia and the relationship between art, war, and genocide. And maybe from today's discussion, you can already grasp all the complexities and all the discussions and different point of views on the topic. I guess Kuma was born for many reasons, but one of the reasons was me coming from Italy, where I studied as an art historian. I was curating exhibitions, coming to Bosnia, like a post-genocide society, immersing myself in the culture, in the city, in the country, and listening to so many stories of people who survived unimaginable events like horror of the war and the genocide, and then decided to make art. I think at some point I struggled on my own. I thought this art that I'm looking at is somehow very complicated. There are many layers. There is a lot of trauma. At the same time, I was thinking how so many people outside Bosnia at that time didn't know much about the history of art of Bosnia, of Sarajevo. So I thought it was important to actually share this knowledge. And I had met so many people during my research. I get to know like incredible people working in culture. We had so many talks over coffees, interviews, and I thought these people, first of all, they are artists, cultural workers, but they are all witnesses of history. They are all survivors, and I think they are incredible stories. I really wanted, the same way they inspired me, I wanted other people to listen to them and to learn from their stories. And I think it was great. Olga, if I can mention you for a second. So Kuma started in 2018, and the first activity we did was an international summer school. The subject was art related to war in Bosnia, visual arts in general. So visual arts, film, theater, design. And it was not only international people who came, but it was also Bosnian people who came. And it was amazing to have like a table where everybody could sit. And it doesn't matter if you went through a war or not. It doesn't matter if you don't have that experience, because we are all going to learn from each other. And the next year I received your motivation letter, Olga, because you wanted to attend summer school. And I still remember you told me, I want to come as an historian and learn from Bosnia, learn from Sarajevo, how they dealt with the war and with the post-war years. And then I want to go back to my country, to Ukraine, and I want to try and implement this knowledge to Ukraine. And that was clear to me, something that I always thought, that what happened to Bosnia and to Sarajevo, it is unique. That's something I said in my talk also, because of the context. But wars are happening, they've been happening, and they will be happening all the time, you know, and maybe there are 2, 3, 4 experiences that we all share, like people that went through wars, they all share. So I thought the example of Bosnia could be very useful, possibly to start a dialogue, like in a conversation, like in other places. So I think it's been now 2, 3 years during summer school. We have a steady presence of participants from Ukraine. We also have participants from Palestine and other war zones or post-conflict places. And we all come together and we start talking about Bosnia and what happened to the artists here and all the consequences, the million consequences of a conflict, of a war, of a genocide, of a siege on people. And then from there, we try to open the discussion. So it's been 8 years of activities. It is a struggle here and there because of the usual financial support. We have many ideas, and sometimes we only have the resources to implement a few of them. But it's been amazing to see all these people, again, Bosnians and people from the outside, to come together to Sarajevo, to learn what it means to make art during the war and what it means to go to a war and then tell the story. Because basically we work with artists that have been processing their traumas, their stories of violence and forced displacement. And it's been really great to hear people sharing. And it's not just visual artists, it's very interdisciplinary. Because for me, again, as an art historian, I was really struggled to understand what I was looking at on my own. So I wanted to have other colleagues from other disciplines to come together. I think that's also the beauty of it. And we hope to inspire other people who would love to share their stories, but somehow it's too painful. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to start from, where to start from. And then maybe from our networks of great people, scholars, artists, they can learn something and then bring it back to their countries. But of course, if anybody is interested, you can check the website, get in touch with me. I mean, I'll be very happy to give more information, and I'm available.
Thank you, dear Claudia. So, dear guests, dear colleagues, now we will finish our event. Later, you will see the recording of this webinar online in our site and social networks. So check in us. We will continue. Thank you so much for Claudia, for all participants, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you everyone for attending. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.